Hey everyone, and welcome back to Thought Pairing. I'm PKD, and today we're going to be diving deep into a book that I think is going to resonate with a lot of you. It's called The Power of Habit by Charles Duhigg. And joining me today to help break down this book is my friend Suchi. Welcome.
Thanks for having me. I'm really excited to talk about this one. It's a good one.
Yeah, this book really gets into, why we do the things we do. And so much of our lives is really governed by these things called habits. And what I really liked about this book is the way Duhigg uses all these stories to really bring the concepts to life.
Oh, absolutely. It's not just, dry theory or anything. Remember that story about Eugene Pauly, the guy who basically lost his memory but could still form new habits?
Oh, yeah. Eugene Pauly. That one was crazy.
I know.
So he had this really severe case of viral encephalitis. And basically what happened was he couldn't remember anything for more than a few minutes.
Right.
But he could still do things like go for a walk around his neighborhood.
Yeah, totally unassisted, even though he had no idea where he was going or why.
If you asked him where he was going, he couldn't tell you.
Exactly. And that's because the habit of that walk was so ingrained, it was embedded in his basal ganglia, which is, that part of the brain that kind of controls automatic behavior.
Right. So it just shows you the power of these unconscious patterns. Even when our conscious memory is gone, it's still there.
It's wild.
And it's not just, mental either. It's physically embedded in our brains.
Yeah, for sure.
And, another example that I thought was fascinating was the one about Pepsodent toothpaste.
Oh, yeah. That was a good one.
So, they basically created this craving in people for that clean teeth feeling.
Right. They kind of tapped into that feeling of film on your teeth. That was the cue.
Yeah.
And then they marketed brushing with Pepsodent as the routine.
And then you get that tingly clean feeling as the reward.
Exactly. So they engineered this whole habit loop.
And it worked. People started craving that sensation.
It became more than just about hygiene.
Yeah. It was psychological.
Totally. And I think that's a really important takeaway for anyone who's trying to build new habits. You got to figure out what feeling you're chasing. What's that reward? Because that's what's going to fuel the whole cycle.
Yeah, that makes sense. And to help us with that, Duhigg gives us this framework. It's called the Golden Rule of Habit Change.
Oh, yeah. The Golden Rule.
So this is all about how to actually hack the habit loop.
Right. So instead of trying to eliminate a bad habit completely, you basically identify the cue, the routine, and the reward. And then you keep the cue and the reward the same. But you insert a new routine.
It's like rewiring the system. Do you remember the example with Mandy, the nail biter?
Oh, yeah.
She was biting her nails all the time.
Yeah, she couldn't stop.
And her therapist helped her to recognize the feeling of tension in her fingertips.
Oh,
that was the cue. And then obviously the biting is the routine.
Right.
And then the sense of relief she got from biting was the reward.
So they had to find a new routine.
Yeah. So instead of biting, they had her grip a pencil or put her hands in her pockets.
Just anything to kind of redirect that energy.
Exactly. And eventually those new actions started to override the nail biting habit.
Because she was still getting that same sense of relief. It's amazing how that works.
But it's not just about swapping one action for another, though, right?
No, definitely not.
There's also this element of belief.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
You have to believe that change is possible.
You have to.
It's almost like a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Right. And the thing is, the more you understand the habit loop, the more you believe that you can change it.
Right. It's not just about willpower.
It's about strategy. It's about understanding how your brain works.
It makes you feel like you're in control, like you're not just a slave to your habits.
Exactly.
But habits aren't just about individual actions either.
Right.
Duhigg also talks about these things called keystone habits. And these are habits that have a ripple effect. They can transform other areas of our lives.
Yeah, they're these small changes that can unlock bigger transformations.
Like the story about Paul O'Neill, the CEO of Alcoa.
Oh, yeah. He was obsessed with worker safety.
When he took over, everyone thought he was crazy because they thought he should be focused on profits. But he knew that if he could change the company's safety habits, it would force them to improve communication and efficiency.
And even their approach to risk.
Yeah. It would change the whole company culture.
And it totally worked. Alcoa's performance skyrocketed.
It's kind of amazing, right?
It is.
One habit can have such a huge impact.
It's not just about the habit itself. It's about the mindset shift it creates.
So I guess the question for everyone watching is, what are your keystone habits? What small changes could you make in your life that might have a similar ripple effect?
That's a great question.
I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Let us know. What habits have you noticed have a ripple effect in your own life?
Yeah, tell us. And it makes you think about like how these individual habits connect to like a bigger picture.
Yeah, like the social context.
Exactly. Like Duhigg also talks about how our social groups actually shape our habits and beliefs.
Oh, yeah. That social influence can be super powerful.
For sure.
Like, think about the Montgomery bus boycott.
Oh, yeah, that's a classic example.
Rosa Parks' act of defiance was obviously huge. But it was really the network of relationships within the Black community that turned it into a movement.
Right. It wasn't just about her, it was about the collective.
Exactly.
And what's interesting here is the way Duhigg talks about strong ties versus weak ties.
Oh, yeah. Strong ties are like your close friends and family.
Right, people you interact with all the time.
And weak ties are more like acquaintances.
Yeah, people you might only see occasionally.
But they're still part of your social sphere.
And Duhigg argues that those weak ties are actually crucial for spreading ideas.
Because they can reach beyond your immediate circle.
Exactly.
And you can see that in the bus boycott.
People felt this pressure to participate
Like a social obligation.
because their whole community was involved.
It wasn't just a personal decision anymore.
It was a collective action.
It's fascinating how that works.
It is?
It makes you realize how much we're influenced by the people around us.
Even when we don't realize it.
And that leads to another example from the book, Saddleback Church.
Oh, yeah, that's an interesting one.
So this is a mega church,
Huge.
and they've basically designed their whole structure around creating habits.
Habits that foster faith.
The founder, Rick Warren, understood that if he wanted to build a thriving community, he needed to create a system that encouraged specific habits
So he created all these small groups
that met in people's homes
to make it easier for people to connect.
and to develop those habits of faith together,
It's like they hacked the habit loop.
to create a framework for spiritual growth.
And it's been incredibly successful.
Yeah, Saddleback has grown like crazy.
Partly because of this focus on building habits through social connection.
It makes you wonder how those principles could be applied in other contexts.
Right.
Like, could businesses or schools use this to create a more positive culture?
That's a really interesting question.
It's all about understanding how social dynamics influence our behavior.
And how we can leverage that understanding to create positive change.
But that brings up a bigger question. The question of free will.
Oh, yeah, that's a big one.
If so much of our behavior is driven by these unconscious patterns, how much control do we really have?
Right. Like, are we just robots?
Duhigg dives into this.
He uses some pretty thought-provoking examples.
Like the story of Angie Bachman.
Woman who got addicted to gambling.
So she was a regular at Haraz Casino.
And they were using all their knowledge of the habit loop to keep her hooked.
They were giving her free trips, limo rides, all sorts of rewards.
Just to trigger that cycle of craving and reward.
And she felt powerless to resist.
She was trapped.
So it raises the question, how much responsibility does a company have when they're manipulating our habits for profit?
That's a tough one.
It's an ethical dilemma for sure.
And Duhigg contrasts that with the case of Brian Thomas.
The guy who killed his wife while sleepwalking.
Oh, yeah, that one's crazy.
He had this sleep terror disorder.
Basically, he was acting out his subconscious fears.
But he wasn't conscious of what he was doing.
So it's like, was he really responsible for his actions?
It's another tough question.
It challenges our whole understanding of responsibility.
In both cases, you have people who are acting in ways they can't control.
Whether it's because of addiction.
Or a sleep disorder.
So where do you draw the line?
Duhigg doesn't give us any easy answers.
No, he doesn't.
But he does say that awareness is key. Once we understand the power of the habit loop, we have a responsibility to address it.
Both in our own lives and in the way it's being used by others.
Knowledge is power in this case.
It allows us to question whether we're shaping our habits.
Or being shaped by them. And that brings us to the core message of the book.
Which is,
We're not just products of our habits.
we have the power to change them.
But how do we actually do that? What tools and strategies does Duhigg offer?
Well, that's a great question. And that's exactly what we'll be diving into in part 3.
We'll explore the practical framework he lays out for habit change.
And how we can use this knowledge to become architects of our own lives.
So stay tuned. All right, so welcome back to Thought Pairing. We're wrapping up our deep dive into the power of habit. And now that we've kind of explored the science and the ethics of habits, let's get to the practical stuff. Like, how do we actually use this knowledge to change our lives?
Right. Like, how do we make it actionable?
Exactly.
And the good news is, Duhigg gives us a framework.
He doesn't just leave us hanging.
No, he doesn't.
So it all starts with that golden rule we talked about.
Keep the cue and the reward the same, but change the routine.
Right. but it's not always easy to figure out what those pieces are.
Yeah, like how do you actually identify the cue, the routine, and the reward?
And then once you do,
Yeah.
what if you can't find a new routine that works?
Right. Well, Duhigg talks about the importance of experimentation.
Like trial and error.
Exactly. You got to become a habit detective.
I like that.
Pay attention to your behavior.
Figure out what triggers it.
What's the cue that sets it off?
And what craving are you trying to satisfy?
Once you know the reward, you can start testing different routines.
To see what gives you that same feeling.
Yeah.
But there's also this element of willpower, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Like change can be hard.
It can.
And sometimes you just don't feel like doing it.
Well, Duhigg has this interesting idea about willpower.
What's that?
He says it's like a muscle.
A muscle.
You can strengthen it through practice.
So the more you use it,
The stronger it gets.
that makes sense.
And what's even more interesting is that self-control in one area of life can actually spill over into other areas.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Like if you start exercising regularly?
You might find it easier to resist that extra slice of cake.
Oh, interesting.
It's like you're developing this mental toughness.
That helps you in other areas.
Exactly.
And Duhigg talks about studies showing that people who exercise regularly, they tend to eat healthier, manage their finances better,
Yeah.
even have better relationships.
It's pretty amazing.
It's a chain reaction.
It is.
So it's not just about breaking bad habits.
It's about building good ones
Those keystone habits
that have that ripple effect.
and that strengthen our willpower along the way.
Exactly.
And that brings us back to belief.
The more you practice self-control, the more you believe you can do it.
It's like you're proving it to yourself.
Right. You go from I can't to I can.
And that changes everything.
It does.
So if we want to be the architects of our own lives,
Like Duhigg says.
it's about understanding those habit loops,
Experimenting with new routines
believing in ourselves.
and finding those keystone habits.
That can unlock our potential.
Exactly.
It's a journey.
It is.
It's not about being perfect.
It's about progress.
And I think that's what's so inspiring about this book.
And it gives us hope.
It gives us tools.
It reminds us that we're not stuck
We have the power to change.
and to create the lives we want.
So we want to hear from you. What habits are you working on changing?
What strategies have you found helpful?
Share your thoughts in the comments below.
We'd love to hear from you.
And if you enjoyed this deep dive, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Thoughtpairing.
For more thought-provoking conversations.
Until next time, keep learning, keep growing, and remember, the power to change your habits. And ultimately, your life lies within you.